Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Ben and I'm a self-taught web developer who went from zero to paid full stack in 8 months via the Odin project. And in today's video, I just wanted to give some thoughts on a question I saw on LinkedIn, which came from the Odin project. And that is, do I need to study the latest, greatest, shiniest tech stacks, languages that are out there right now in order to get a job? And I'm going to start by sharing a post or response to this on LinkedIn from someone who's very well known in the Odin Project Discord. If you've spent any time on that Discord, you'll probably have seen his name. And apologies if you hear the crackling in the background, that's just my cozy little wood stove here burning to keep me nice and toasty. So let's take a look at what his response was to this. It's a question that comes up many times in the Odin Project. Do I need to learn the libraries, the technologies, the frameworks, the languages in order to have a fighting chance in this field? And this is usually for people who are self-taught or going through a boot camp perhaps, and they're trying to get their first job as a software developer in the field. They're trying to break in, which is the absolute hardest part of becoming a software developer, is getting that first role. And a lot of people, I think, have a lot of anxiety around where to place their time, how to spend their time with regards to what to study, because there are just so many different languages, so many different frameworks and libraries, and so many opinions on the internet about what is best for you. And let's take a look at this post and we'll see Carlos's response on this, and I'll jump in with a few of my thoughts as well and some additional stuff at the end. So Carlos, if you see this, hopefully you don't mind me sharing your name, but you are very much out there in many different communities, so I don't think you'll be upset whatsoever. But anyway, so many folks coming to the Odin project express the worry of needing to learn technology, library, framework, language X, Y, and Z in order to have a fighting chance in this field. When I got my job, talking about himself, I didn't know the technologies they use. I still got hired. So 100%. I had the exact same experience. So the job I first got was at FreshBooks. I was an intern. And I'd done some JavaScript in the Odin project, but not a ton. I'd built a couple of small games, did the foundations, which has some JavaScript in it. And then I focused solely on Ruby and the framework of Ruby on Rails. And I built an application in that, which was a pet rescue application. And I had a lot of passion about that. And that, I think, came across in the interview in FreshBooks. That gave them enough confidence to say, oh, okay, this guy's really interested in learning, really interested in growing and developing, and knows enough to be useful, at least with a little bit of time and training. And that first job was in Python on the back end. I'd never even seen Python, never even thought about learning Python. I jumped in, and because I understood the fundamentals in another language or two languages, Ruby and JavaScript, picking up a third, Python, which is also quite easy and clean to learn anyway, it wasn't too hard to do. And framework-wise, you kind of just learn as you need to. You get a task in front of you and you learn what you need to do in that framework in order to achieve those goals. And there's people around you as well that you can ask questions to. So my point here is, you don't need to know the technology that you're being hired for necessarily, because I certainly didn't have that experience in getting my first job. So Carlos says, when I got my job, I didn't know the technologies they used. I still got hired. So the investment of time and energy into things like JavaScript and React got me in a position to learn what I later needed on the job. And that's so true, because once you've learned one language and once you've learned one web framework, if you have to transition to another language or another web framework, that step of being able to become productive is going to be so much shorter, because you've already done it once in another language and framework. Because you will eventually see that there's a lot of similarities between languages and between frameworks. So you can build on your prior knowledge to be much quicker with your on-ramp to a new language and framework. So the investment of time and energy into things like JavaScript and React got me in a position to learn what I later needed on the job. Yep, JavaScript is very popular. Chances are, if you're a web developer, you're going to be touching JavaScript anyway. So it is certainly a very good language to learn, at least the fundamentals of. I stayed focused and didn't spend my time learning every single new thing that people swore was critical. And that is so key. I think this is if I was to choose any sentence to bold in this entire passage, it would be that one. I stayed focused and didn't spend my time learning every single new thing that people swore was critical. And that, I think, is so important to keep in the back of your mind when you're planning your strategy of how to learn to become a software developer. Stay focused. Pick a language, pick a framework. Or if you're doing the Odin project, you'll get exposure to, if you take the Ruby path, you'll get exposure to JavaScript and Ruby on Rails, okay? With Ruby and Ruby on Rails being the primary framework. If you stay focused, you will go deeper into a language. You will go deeper into a framework. And as you go deeper, you build more context, more understanding, and more competence, okay? Whereas if you go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, you never go deep in any, you don't build that experience, you don't build that competence and context and understanding, and it's only going to be chopping your own legs up from the bottom, and it's not going to help you whatsoever. Yes, and the second part of this is every single new thing that people swore was critical. Like I said, there's a ton of opinions on the internet, including my own, but I'm not telling you to learn any specific language or framework. I'm telling you to choose one and go deeper in it. That's going to serve you so much better in the long run than if you try and, you know, take little bits and bites from different ones, because you will never develop any real competence if you do that. So reflecting on this, since I've had the opportunity to take some time off work and experiment with things I've been curious about. Got some learning practicing with React Native and Expo, and currently looking at the app I made on my iPhone. Cool. This all reminds me of a convo I had with my supervisor after getting hired. I was worried about getting put in the back-end project because I wasn't as familiar. I asked to be sent in since avoiding it wouldn't help. After that project, I realized programming is programming. Yeah, it's true. So sure, there are nuances as we move from some domain to another, some language to another, but we only need to learn the building blocks once. Yes. After that, it's a matter of learning how the blocks work in a new thing we're looking at. That's exactly what I've been talking about with building a context, building an experience, understanding what's familiar between languages and frameworks so that when you go to the next one, the on-ramp is so much shorter. And before people freak out, I'm not saying you should not look at new technologies. Sure, okay. For folks that are job searching, I think the majority of your study time should be spent reviewing what you know, and some smaller fraction on new things you're curious about. I think this is good advice, and you know, Carlos has been around long enough. He's self-taught. He's very helpful in the Odin project community, so he gives very good advice, and I agree completely with this advice. I have some other thoughts I would offer additionally to this, just from my own experience, my own context, and that is, you know, in his last few passages here, we only need to learn the building blocks once, 100%. He's saying we should not look at new technologies. I agree with that. I think especially when you're learning and before you have your first job, go as deep as you can in a single language and a single framework before you even think about learning a new technology. The best part about being a junior developer and getting hired in your first job is you're going to get paid to learn. You're learning so much, right? The amount of value you provide the company is versus the amount that they're paying you. I mean, obviously they pay you less, but I still feel like that ratio is usually very much in your benefit, where you get paid to learn a ton. You get paid to build your skill set, build your competence, right? And that's going to take you a lot further. So that's the nice thing about being a junior, is you get paid to learn. So there's no need to dabble in all these different things before you get that first job. Go deep in a language, go deep in a framework, build some cool stuff, build some impressive stuff. Get to a point where you can speak with confidence about a certain language or about a certain framework. Because even if the company that's hiring you is using a different framework or a different language, they will see that, oh, you are able to go deeper in a certain language, in a certain framework. Chances are you're going to be able to go deep enough in the tech stack that we use. And so many people have experienced this, where they learn one thing, they get hired in another, and that's because the people hiring them know that they have the competence to go deep enough in what that company is using. So that's certainly something I would recommend. Don't dabble before you get your first job. Now, after you get your first job, you're going to get paid to learn possibly a new language, a new framework in your new job. That's great. And if your interest peaks in other areas in your own time, then go for it. But I think for starters, don't do that. Don't chase the shiny object before you have your first job. And for folks that are job searching, I think the majority of your study time should be spent on reviewing what you know and some smaller fraction of new things you're curious about. Yeah, I'd say if you're a curious person, maybe dabble, but only spend 5-10% of your time doing that. Don't spend all of your time trying to find out new stuff. What I would really recommend is, like I said, dive deeper in a particular language, particular framework, build something impressive, build something real, build something that has actual users, because that is going to be far more impressive than the generic projects that every other person does and that recruiters and hirers have seen 100 times over. To-do lists, weather apps, things like that. Build something cool. Find a problem and solve it. And you'll be able to do that, have the skills to do that, if you spend your time in one language, one framework, and go deep enough. Now, I would just like to add on my closing remarks here, in a separate vein from this, some companies, in my experience, will only hire people who have competence in that language, in that framework. So I have been working in Ruby and Ruby on Rails for the past couple of years. Both the companies that I've worked for in Ruby and Ruby on Rails, I do not think they would hire anyone who is not competent, has not worked in Ruby and Ruby on Rails before. And this is going to vary from company to company. In my experience, the smaller companies that have smaller dev teams, and especially those with Ruby on Rails that are interested in being able to put things out quickly with small dev teams, they don't want to waste that time waiting for somebody to upskill and build competence in that language and framework, even if they've come from another language and framework, unless that person is a rock star. Just because it's going to cost them time, cost them money, essentially, for that on-ramp. Bigger companies, however, I think are more willing to accept or bring in people who have skill sets from other languages and technologies. I think a good way to separate those might be those companies that do DSAs versus those that do take-home projects. And those that do DSA stuff, data structure and algorithm interviews, I think are looking for the underlying skill set and problem solving. They're less inclined to worry about what language and framework that you know. Whereas those that are going to ask you to do a take-home in a specific language and framework, because that's what they use, then that's what they care about, is competence in that language and framework. So what I did was this is looking back at Carlos's comment here where he said, I stayed focused and didn't spend my time learning every single new thing that people swore was critical. That's where I chose Ruby and Ruby on Rails. I knew I want to focus on Ruby and Ruby on Rails. I'm going to get a job as a Ruby and Ruby on Rails developer. I knew that from day one. That's because I had a friend who does it. And I like the idea of being in a smaller company where you have less red tape and things are moving quicker and can shift more quickly. And I'm very much more, outcome oriented. I like the process, but I'm more interested in getting stuff out there and built, and Ruby on Rails is a great framework for that. So I knew that going into it, so I stayed focused on Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and that's what's led me down the path of being able to get jobs in Ruby and Ruby on Rails. Whereas if I was being less picky, I would probably go on the JavaScript route because most web developers need JavaScript anyway. And then I would have focused more maybe on DSA type stuff, and then applied to bigger companies that are looking for people with underlying skill sets rather than specific languages and frameworks. That's just my experience though. The main thing is I stuck with one and I kept at it, and I now work in that field. So it worked out for me, and I'd say the underlying recommendations here as I close out is just pick one thing, pick one language, pick one framework, get good at it, and then when you start applying to jobs, you will have more confidence to speak about what you know, and that's going to shine through in any interview that you get and give the confidence to the person who's assessing you that you would be able to pick up what language and framework that they work in. Okay, what are your thoughts down below? Curious to see if you think this is useful. This comments from Carlos, do you agree with it, disagree with it? What about me? Do you think I'm full of it, or do you agree? All right, have a good one. See you next time.